Me being an idiot, I just sit in the car, no seat. I'm like sitting on the floor, laptop in my lap. So we did like a first through fourth pull on like a back road in the middle of nowhere, and the car like darted off the road. The door and the A-pillar separated probably about this much, and I managed to fly like in between the A-pillar and the door. I woke up 3 weeks later in the hospital here in Fort Lauderdale. Had to get reconstructive surgery, lost all my teeth, shattered my legs, my femur, I have rods in my legs. It was bad. So in 2021, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. Like I could feel something down there that just didn't feel normal. I want to say 2 years prior, that I already knew that something was wrong. I went and saw a urologist. It was clear as day. Like the cancer markers came up, and in the pictures you could see it was like a solid mass. And he was like, "You got to get surgery. I'm gonna schedule you this week." And I was like, I freaked out. I was like, man, like I knew something was wrong 2 years ago, and it's just getting dealt with now. With me not staying there, he couldn't push the cars out of the shop and stuff, and he decided to just do it on the floor where the car was. He jacked it up, had it on jacks, no jack stands. He was working on the car, and the car ended up slipping off the jack, landed on him, and he, ended up passing away in the shop. It messed me up for a while. He was almost like a brother to me. He was a real close friend. It sucked. Like it sucked for a long time. What's going on, guys? Fred from Derf Tuning here, and this is my story. My start of cars was, with my dad growing up. He told me he had a 72 Monte Carlo 454. He had a Crowler cam, open header. He always used to tell me how he would take it to the street races. And at the time, I wasn't alive yet, but my mom was like 8 months pregnant with my older brother that's 5 years older than me. So he would like kick her out of the car and make her sit on the curb while he's, doing digs in Hialeah or wherever they were street racing at the time. And, I got the buzz of getting into cars from just hearing the stories about, him racing cars as he was younger. It just progressed. Like I was saying, I liked mini trucks, lowriders, domestic cars. I never really cared for the import stuff because at the time, it wasn't really a big market yet. This was, I'm talking like early 90s, which it had just started. So for me as a young kid, I didn't know any better. I ended up moving to a new house and ended up living right down the street from a kid that was about 4 or 5 years older than me. He had a Chevy Nova that him and his dad would work on and stuff. And I used to peek by, I used to like try to sneak by and like catch his interest to see if he would let me hang out with them. And surprisingly, he was very open to, letting me hang out with them. I was only 12, 13 at the time, and he was, 16, 17 years old. It sounds weird, but it was almost like I was the younger brother that he didn't have, and he was the older brother that was into cars that I didn't have. Because my older brother was never into this kind of stuff. He liked hip hop and DJing and stuff like that. This kid, his name's John, would let me help him work on his Nova. We'd sanded it, put a motor in it, and got it all done. But as soon as the car was done, he sold it right away. Got a ton of money for it, and his dad ended up buying him a flip light, like one of the older 89 Integras. I didn't know any better. Like now when I look at him, nobody likes a flip light Integra, but back in 90, I want to say it was 95, somewhere around there. The thing was super clean. It probably had 5,000 or 6,000 miles on it. It was like a super clean car. He started taking me to street races with him. I was 12, 13 years old at the time. My mom thought, Fred and John, they're hanging out, not doing much, not realizing we're racing around South Florida, going to all these different race spots till 2 or 3 in the morning. That's where like the import stuff really started to take off for me. It just caught my interest so much because of how quick we were able to go with such a small car. Like when you start a V8, it just seems fast. Like even if they only make 300 horsepower, like just the muscle of them, you can tell, it's gonna be fast. Where these, it's like unsuspecting. Something about it caught my interest, and like the working on them and all doing motor swaps and stuff. It just always was fun to me, doing the hands-on stuff. Like when I was a kid, I would take all my toys apart and break them and stuff just to like figure out how to work on stuff. And obviously my parents hated it, but it's what got me into like the, the mechanic side of, cars and performance stuff in general. So as I got a little older, I wanted a Honda, of course, once we got into the racing stuff. My parents hit me with the, save every dollar you get from work, and when the time comes to buy a car, we'll split it with you. Whatever you save, we'll match up. So probably for a solid like 2.5 years, I didn't spend a dollar. Like every single dollar I made went right into my bank account, didn't spend anything. The day I turned 16, I got my license. A couple weeks later, I'm like, all right, I saved up like 6-7 grand. I can get like a GSR, a brand new car, something at the time. These cars weren't expensive then. Like you can get brand new Integra, not a Type R, but you can get a GSR or like a clean Civic SI hatch, something for under $15,000. In my head, I'm getting a brand new car and my parents are gonna split it. I'll be good. So they're like, oh, you know, how much money did you save? And I was like, oh, like 6-7 grand. They're like, oh no, you can go buy your own car. And I'm like, bro, are you kidding me? Like, I was upset, obviously, but in my head, I was like, all right, well, instead of buying a $6,000-7,000 car, I'm gonna look for the cheapest car I can find, and then it'll give me room to, you know, start modifying this stuff. So I always wanted a CRX. There was a couple, you know, all-out race car builds at the time that were CRXs that caught my attention. I really liked them a lot, so started looking for CRXs, and I found one for like 1,800 bucks. It was in decent condition. It was SI, so it had a decent motor. It had like some Fittipaldi wheels, which were cool at the time. I get the car, and within like 3 days, it had a nitrous kit. I cut the muffler off. It had like a Home Depot intake pipe that I put on it. We didn't know anything at the time. Me and my buddy, you know, installed everything. I'm calling NOS on the phone, you know, asking them how to install the stuff and what to do with the timing, and we're just turning the distributor back. There was no tuning back then, so it ran decent, and then the clutch lasted like 4 days max, I would say. Trying to 1-2 power shift it on nitrous and taking all my friends for rides. It probably went through like 3 bottles and the clutch was toast. I brought it to, you know, a mechanic shop that was in the area, and they told me like 1,500 bucks or something to put a clutch in it, which it's not bad, like it's not a terrible deal, but I had spent all my money buying the car and modifying it, and at 16 years old, to save up $1,500 at the time, making, you know, $4.75 an hour, it was never gonna get done. So I was like, all right, we gotta figure this out myself. So dropped the tranny out and did everything myself, and it probably took like 3 weeks to put a clutch in the car, but you know, that's how it all started. All the mechanic stuff is just, I couldn't afford the stuff. So it was like, I'll either do it myself or I'm just not gonna be able to have a modified car. So that car actually ended up getting stolen. Car theft at the time was crazy with the Honda stuff. Like, it's not as bad now, like they still get stolen, but at the time was crazy. Like, you couldn't leave your car anywhere. I had worked at the Sawgrass Mills Mall. I'm working and I get a call from Sunrise Police Station. They're like, oh, Mr. Morales, we have your car here. And I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, my car is out in the parking lot. I just got here, like, and I hung up on them. And then my mom calls me, same thing. I run outside and I look and the car's gone. End up being, they made it maybe like 2 miles away and they blew it up. I guess they knew it was on nitrous and they were spraying it and the bottle was empty and they blew it up. Car was stuck on the side of the road. In my head, I was like, oh, insurance is gonna pay for this. I can get a GSR swap now. I could do this, that, and the other. I ended up taking it to a shop. They looked at it and insurance just totaled the car. And they gave me like a check for like 3 grand or something, which I guess I made some money on the car, but it's definitely not what I wanted. I was definitely upset about that. So probably about 6 months went by. I didn't have a car. I'm like taking the bus to work and to school. I was still in high school at the time. I ended up finding an 89 Civic, or not even an SI, it was like a 4-speed DX. I was like into EFs at the time. I hate them now, but at the time I was like super into the EF stuff. So I got a 89 EF hatch DX 4-speed, and we did a ZC swap, which is like a twin cam, non-VTEC. It's almost like a single cam, but with like a twin cam head on it. That swap probably took like 2 or 3 months. We didn't know anything. Like, it took me like probably 2 weeks just to get the motor out of the car because we didn't know that the subframe needed to come out, and we were young. Like this, I was 16 years old. I had a friend of mine that was a couple years older helping me work on the car, but we're doing this like in my front of my parents' house where they have an HOA, and I'm like dropping the swap in the middle of the street, making a mess, and they hated me in that neighborhood. So, you know, that swap took forever, got it running, and it just wasn't great. Like, those motors make like 120 horsepower to the flywheel max. It ended up with a nitrous kit again, and, you know, started street racing the car more as I got a little older. After my first car got stolen, I didn't, you know, get attached to anything anymore. It was kind of like, anyone that's known me, they know that like I don't hold on to cars. So it was like, after that first one got stolen, if someone came up on a deal like, oh, I want to buy your car, or I'll trade you this, like the car started disappearing like that. So that SI hatch, I sold it to buy a DA Integra. And then same with that one. That one ended up nitrous, traded that one for an EJ coupe. That's a 92, 95 Civic coupe. That's when I started getting into the B-Series stuff. I got GSR swap in that one. Again, nitrous. It went like 13.2 on street tires. Traded for an SI hatch. That one ended up with a Type R motor, and that's where things really started to progress. That car ended up having the record for the fastest nitrous Honda for a long time. Like, I want to say up until maybe the past 10 years, that record was finally broken because the K-Series cars, they're super fast on nitrous now. But that car had a built Type R motor on like 2 kits of nitrous, and I was making around 250 on motor, and it was making like 500 on nitrous. And I used to drive this car like every day. It had AC, everything, full interior, and it went 1060 at 136 back in 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. That was like no tuning on that also. That was like chip computer, and then we just like test the nitrous on the street, make sure the plugs weren't burning up. After that, the nitrous just, it got expensive because obviously without the tuning at the time, we're burning up pistons and going through plugs like crazy and going through bottles. So transition into getting a turbo setup, and that same motor, I just put lower compression pistons in it and put a turbo setup on it. At the time, like a 60-1 was considered big. That was the first car that ended up getting a standalone. I had like an AEM V1 on it. At the time, to get something tuned, it was anywhere from $500 to $800 for the tuner, and then you're paying another $250 an hour for the dyno time. I was 18, 19 years old, I think, and I couldn't afford that. So I paid it once. I had Lance, which, a lot of people know Lance, we're cool now. He's one of the, top tuners in the country, especially with the AM stuff. He tuned the car for me, made, I think, like 600 horsepower. The car actually didn't go any faster. It went the same time that it went on the nitrous setup, but on the street, it was a lot faster. I think it hurt the motor or something. I put it back together, put a bigger turbo on it, and then I knew the car had to be retuned, so I was like, let me see if Lance will give me a deal on it, and it was the same thing. It was gonna be like $500 plus $250 an hour for the dyno, and I was just like, you know what, I can figure this out myself. So I get a laptop, plug into it, and just start messing around with it. And since I already had a pretty decent tune on it, it didn't take much, but I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I was like, oh, this, timing setting makes the car go a lot faster, and just add more of it, and then all of a sudden, pistons have a bunch of holes in them. It took a while because the tuning stuff was never like a job. Like, I never wanted to do it for money or a career or anything. It was just to make sure that the car ran properly to go racing. The street racing scene was huge down here. The track, when we still had one, at the time was Moroso, but PBR, they closed. We would be at the track like every Wednesday and Friday, or anytime there was a big event, we were there. This is when like 10-second cars were like super fast. The tuning stuff, like I was saying, was just to get my car running properly to go race. I had people that, messaged me asking, oh, can you tune my car? Because they saw how my car ran, but like I was saying, it wasn't a job, and I didn't want anyone else's car to be as fast as mine was, so it wasn't just something that I offered. Around that time, I ended up getting linked up with Steven Thomson at Pacific Performance in 2005. I got a job there, which for me at the time was huge. Like, anyone that's been in the import scene would know these guys were like, innovators at the time, not just in South Florida, but in the Honda scene in general. Like, they had the first 10-second cars on the East Coast, the first 9-second, and even back to like 11-second cars. Him and John Brown were huge in the import scene. So to work with these guys, it was pretty cool at the time. They were already kind of on the downside of getting out of the scene at the time. As I started working with them, they had like a pro front-wheel drive car, but they already stopped campaigning it. They had gone, I think, like 850s with it at the time. I learned a lot from those guys. I want to say I worked there for 2 years. Just doing basic stuff. They had me doing motor swaps and stuff and turbo kit installs, which stuff that I had already learned on my own. But he started teaching me like the ins and outs more of like the actual competitive racing. Even though they were out of it, he knew that I was into racing and I would take my car to the track. So he showed me, like, he was the one that made me put a cage in my car. This was the SI hatchback I had at the time with the Type R motor. They didn't have a dyno or anything there, so tuning, again, wasn't a priority. It was just something I did for myself. It wasn't anything that I could make money on or cared to make money on. Pacific started to really slow down. Like, guys weren't bringing the cars in for stuff anymore. So I was like, I gotta find something else to do, because when I was working there, it was like mostly commission. I think I only got paid like $100 a week, plus if I worked on a car, I wanna say I got like 20% of whatever the labor was. My friend at the time, as I mentioned earlier, Jose Rodriguez, he was huge in the racing scene down here. He had originally it was a red EG hatch that had gone like 1070, which was, one of the fastest cars at the time. And then he had an EK hatch that, when I met him, it just looked like a stock EK, like stock tires, stock hubcaps, stock height, but it had a fully built Type R motor on like a 350 shot of nitrous. And this thing would go like 11 O's on nitrous, and nobody would expect it. Kind of threw me off. The first time I met him, he let me go drive the car somewhere. He was like, oh, go take it to Advance to go pick up some plugs or something. And he's like, the bottle's on if you want to try it. And then, like, in my head, I'm like, is this guy joking? Like, I literally just met this guy, and he's gonna let me go spray his, 300 shot B series. So I was like, of course I'm gonna do it. Like, I'm like, he said I can do it, you know, why not? So, you know, I'd pull out of his shop and do like a first to fourth pull, you know, spraying it. Of course, the thing comes back like, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I just blew this guy's car up. Like, I literally just met this guy, blew up this Type R motor. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. He looks at it and he's like, oh no, it burned a plug. It's not a big deal. And in my head, I'm like, I would never in my life let some random person jump in my car and let him spray it and then like act like it's no big deal when it burns up a plug. But it was kind of like that introduction was like what made us super tight. Like how he was so open to letting me get involved with the racing stuff that he did, that, you know, our relationship was like insane. As Pacific started to kind of, you know, phase out, he was opening up a shop in Fort Lauderdale with his girlfriend at the time, which HPC, Horsepower Connection, where a lot of people know me from originally. I started actually working with him there, and we got a dyno there, big shop, got into racing, and that's where like the introduction of tuning kind of started. But he was like the head guy at the shop. I was young, I was like his apprentice there. So I did my own tuning and stuff. It wasn't something that I was doing for other people. I worked there 06, 07, and he ended up passing away. It was February 13th, day before Valentine's Day. He was staying to do the turbo kit on his girlfriend's RSX, so that way the next day she would show up and she had a turbo RSX. And it's sad to say, I didn't really care for her, so he had asked me to stay and help him work on it, and I was like, nah, I got other things to do. You know, I don't want to stay and work on the car. With me not staying there, he couldn't push the cars out of the shop and stuff, and he decided to just do it on the floor where the car was. And he jacked it up, had it on jacks, no jack stands. He was working on the car, and the car ended up slipping off the jack, landed on him, and he, you know, ended up passing away in the shop. It messed me up for a while. You know, he was almost like a brother to me. He was a real close friend, and knowing that that could have possibly been avoided if I would have, you know, decided to stay at the shop late to help him move the cars around and help him work on the car, it sucked. Like, it sucked for a long time. And, you know, obviously I can't blame myself for it happening, but like knowing that things could have possibly been different if I would have stayed there and helped him, it was rough. You know, the shop was kind of in like a limbo. We didn't know what we were gonna do. His girlfriend at the time was involved. Like, she was the one that actually controlled the shop. Like, it was in her name, her family's name and whatnot. At the time, we were racing we didn't even get to race it yet, but we had built a 92 to 95 Civic, which most people know me for, the orange coupe. That's the car we built. B-Series, you know, at the time, Sport front-wheel drive was when it first came out. We had just built the car, didn't get to race it, and at the time, the goal was to run a 9-second pass, which not a lot of people had done yet. There was only, I think Jason Hunt was one of the first, and him and Brian Ballard were going 9s with their CRXs, which they were going like 980s, and like nobody was doing that at the time. So obviously the goal was to try to get that car to go into the 9s, you know, after he passed away. So he passed away, we campaigned the NHRA Sport Compact Series that whole year. We made the first race at Moroso, it was I think March. Then we went to Englishtown, we went to Virginia. We went to all these tracks up and down the East Coast and could not get the car to go 9s. It was just dumb stuff, like axle would pop out or just random stuff, but the car would go like 10-0, 10-1, 10-0, 10-1 every pass. That whole year goes by, we didn't do anything. And then at the end of the year, his girlfriend at the time decided that she just didn't want anything to do with the shop anymore. Like, his passing away was too much on her, and she just wouldn't want to come to the shop anymore. So she gave me the opportunity to end up buying the shop out from her. I would think I was 19, 20, I would say 20, maybe 21 max at the time. I didn't even look over anything. I was just like, give me it. Sign the papers. I didn't care. I didn't care the cost of the shop, what the bills were gonna be, nothing. It was stupid. Like, looking back now, like, it was a very bad move. Like, the shop ended up being back on rent and had a bunch of bills, but at the time I didn't care because this was like my best friend that passed away. So if I could keep the shop going and the race car going and all the stuff that came with it, I was like, whatever, sign me up, I'll deal with it later. I ended up taking over the shop, and that was the first time I ended up having my own dyno. So the shop was mine, the race car was mine, had my own dyno, and that's where the dyno tuning kind of started to become something that I can actually make money on. Back to the coupe, that was like the only focus, which ended up being the downfall of the shop. It was like all I cared about was racing, and sad to say, but girls at the time. So I was in my early 20s, my focus was going out, partying, racing. I had no business owning a shop. You know, we worked on the car a lot, changed the whole setup on it, and I want to say the end of '08, the car finally went a 9-second pass. Went like a 980 at 156 or something. And then after that, it was like, simple. Like once you do it the first time, it becomes super easy after that. So we ended up getting the car to go like a 960. The whole True Street class kind of came out with the 62 mil turbos and the 67s, and we got the car to a 930. After that, it was kind of like we did, or at least I did what I wanted to do with the car. The goal was to go 9s with it. It kind of just got put on the back burner. Like when he passed away, like the racing, and at least for me, it wasn't as interesting anymore because it was him and I that did everything. So with him gone, it was tough. And like even now, like for me to go to the track now, it's tough. Like I don't have a bunch of people that come to the track with me. So when he passed away, it was kind of like I had to find people like, hey, you want to go to the track? Can you help? And this and that. So the racing kind of fell off. That's when I realized that the shop wasn't really working out. Like it wasn't making money, at least not enough to maintain that style shop. It was something, this size with a dyno and stuff, and I'm 21 years old, worrying about racing, worrying about street racing, just worrying about my own stuff and not actually doing what a business owner should do. I did learn a ton from having my own dyno there. Having my own stuff where I can just put my car in the dyno all day long and try different cams, headers, intakes, different timing levels on different setups. I learned a ton. Like I blew up a lot of I blew up a lot of stuff. That's kind of what got me to learn so much of what works and what doesn't. I get a lot of guys that will message me and, oh, can you teach me how to tune? Or what school did you go to? And, what do you recommend? And I didn't do any of that. All the tuning stuff was just off my personal cars. Like I never touched anyone else's car until I had already had, probably 100 motors of my own that I had already tuned before I ended up touching on anyone else's stuff, because I don't want to use someone else's car or money as a guinea pig for me to learn on. And I do it to this day. Like this car has been on an AEM V2, which I have known for a very long time. Ended up on an Infinity, which, I learned a lot on this car. I ended up putting a fuel tech in it, and it was all just so I can learn the ins and outs of the ECU on my own stuff before I end up charging anyone else to work on their stuff. So this car now actually, I want to say, has the quickest and fastest time for, a street Honda on a fuel tech, and I want to say also on the Infinity, because it had went a 747 on the Infinity, and then it's gone a 741 now on the fuel tech. Towards the end of 2009-ish was when I kind of stopped racing the Orange Coupe. I ended up closing the shop. That's where the tuning kind of took over, because that's something that I could do freelance, where I didn't need to have my own shop. And at that time, I didn't really want to do hands-on mechanic stuff anymore anyway, so the tuning stuff kind of picked up, but it definitely wasn't, what it is now. I wasn't doing the remote tunes, like the online stuff wasn't really a thing, so I had a decent market down here, but it wasn't too crazy. Stefan from STP, he's had a dyno forever, and would start letting me use the dyno there, and I would just book cars, I'd do a few cars a week. And at the time, I was young still, so my bills weren't crazy. I didn't have a house at the time. I didn't have 4 kids. If I had enough money to get by for the week, that's all I cared about. So if I could do 3 or 4 cars a week, I was fine. I was out still racing bikes. I had motorcycles, street racing cars. So as long as I had enough money to pay for gas and whatnot and still living with my parents, I was fine. So I ended up getting my first travel tuning trip around that time. I think it was 2010. I ended up going down to St. Croix. Someone flew me down there, which was like crazy. Like I didn't even think this was something that people did. I ended up flying out of the country to go tune some cars. I did pretty decent work down there, so I actually picked up. Like I ended up going on a few more trips, and every time I'd go, I'd book like 20 cars for the weekend or something and come back with, solid money at the time. Not having a mortgage and all that stuff, you make $5,000 in a weekend. It goes a long way. So the tuning definitely picked up a lot. Started getting more known, in the islands and whatnot. Fast forward to 2012, there was a big race down in St. Croix, the island that I had been sent down to probably about 5 times already now. I get down there, and it was just something weird about that weekend. It almost felt like Final Destination, where like you have signs of like something bad is gonna happen. So I ended up missing my flight to get down there originally, so I had to get a flight booked. My bag ends up getting like misplaced at the airport. And then I get down there, and one of the first cars that I was supposed to work on, the clutch was broken in it. And then the guy that actually sent me down there, He ordered like a turbo kit to put on the car. He was supposed to put it on. I was going to tune the car. They sent him the wrong turbo kit. It was just like one thing after another that like kept, stupid things kept happening. We ended up getting to the track that weekend, and again, we're about to go down the track, and someone crashes their motorcycle. It's not like up here where, they can do a cleanup in, 10, 15 minutes and, things get rolling again. They end up closing the track. My bright idea is like, oh, well, let's just mess with the car on the street. We have a big race set up tomorrow for money. Let's not waste any time. Let's just dial in the boost on the street, and then, we'll be good come tomorrow. We end up leaving the track and get in the car. Me being an idiot, I just sit in the car, no seat. I'm like sitting on the floor, laptop in my lap, no seat belt, nothing. It had a Turbo B series making probably like 800 horsepower. We started doing pulls on the street, and the last thing I remember is we left the track and we got onto like a straight road, and the car hit like a 45-pound boost cut or something. I made some adjustments, and then I woke up 3 weeks later in the hospital here in Fort Lauderdale. I had no idea what happened. They start telling me, the whole story. So we ended up going a little further. We actually got the car to hold boost. So we did like a first through fourth pull on like a back road in the middle of nowhere, just like no lights. The roads are super tiny, and apparently the car had like a phantom grip in it. Diff broke, and the car like darted off the road. And the roads there, they don't have like curbs or anything. It's just like a ditch. And then we went down into a ditch, and then there was like a turn in to like a house or something. So we jumped the turn in, and then the car lands like on the front corner here on my side. I guess I flew out of the window. I didn't even fly out the window. So when it crashed, the door and the A-pillar separated probably about this much, and I managed to fly like in between the A-pillar and the door, and just doing that, my face hit everything on the way out and just broke everything. Had to get reconstructive surgery, lost all my teeth, shattered my legs, my femur. I have rods in my legs. It was bad. Like I was in a coma for a few weeks. Like I was saying, I don't remember any of it. Luckily at the time, the girl I was dating, she worked at the hospital. They weren't gonna send me they weren't gonna pick me up from down there. They were gonna send me to Puerto Rico, and I was gonna have to just stay there until they found a way for me to get back to Fort Lauderdale. And she spoke to the heads at the hospital at the time, and they sent a private jet down. They flew me up here, and I ended up luckily back in Fort Lauderdale. It was a rough time. Like that happened July of 2012, and I got out of the hospital. It happened July 8th, 2012, and I got out of the hospital the day of my birthday. It was July 21st. I had just turned 30. I remember like dying to get out of the hospital. I wanted to get home so bad. I didn't realize how bad I really was. Like once I actually got home and I didn't have people taking care of me, or wasn't on an IV drip with pain meds and stuff, it was rough. Like I didn't realize how beat up I really was. Like I couldn't eat. I had wires in my mouth. Like I couldn't walk. I went in the hospital at like 100, and I was probably about my size now. I was like 190-ish, and I got out of the hospital at 121 pounds. So I lost like 70 pounds just from, not eating, or just, all the trauma my body went through. I had to get like 4 different blood transfusions, and it was bad. I didn't want anything to do with cars after that. Like, I couldn't walk for 4 or 5 months, ton of pain. I was miserable. Like, I had to sell everything I owned. I had no money. I had a, 6-year-old son at the time. Couldn't afford to pay for anything. My girlfriend that actually helped me out getting me, back to the States was actually with someone else in the hospital, dating them while she was with me, like while I'm in a coma, and I ended up finding out like a year later. That messed me up. So it was a bad time for me. Like I definitely wasn't happy, and I didn't like how I looked. Like I looked completely different than I did before the accident. It was definitely a rough period of my life. Like it took a lot to get through, the depression of, everything that I had gone through. And it bothered me for a long time. Like the date would come, it would be like, oh, it's been a year, and it's been 2 years. Like I would keep track of it like clockwork, because it like had such a negative effect on my life. Now it's kind of like, I remember it because it did change my life, but it kind of, now it's been a blessing where I look at it as like, if that wouldn't have happened, then I wouldn't have what I have now. You know what I mean? I ended up meeting someone else, you know, and that was like the start of, you know, actually becoming happy. You know, we're still together now. This has been 11 years. We met in 2013, which ironically, we dated when we were probably like 19. When I met her, I had the Civic with the Type R motor on nitrous and stuff. I met her like at the street races with like we had like the same group of friends, and we dated back then. And then it was kind of ironic. We ended up linking up, you know, 10, 11 years later, and we're still together now. We have 2 kids together, and then she has, you know, a daughter with someone else, which I consider her my daughter now. You know, I've been raising her for 11 years. And then I have my older son, like I was saying, he was 6 when I got in the accident, and he's 18 now. So I have a 19-year-old, an 18-year-old, and then I have Jet, which is 8 now, and then I have Jace, which is gonna be 3 coming this year. So it's like definitely a big transition in the ages of the kids, but it's, like I was saying, it's been a blessing. And none of that would have happened if that accident happened. It's kind of weird how like certain things in your life are like a major turning point on, you know, how the rest of your life is going to go. And what started off as like what I thought was going to be the end of my life ended up being the start of, you know, a whole new life, which, you know, I'm definitely thankful for.
So, man, trying to get back to work. My first time back at the dyno. It's a little rough, but I got a lot of help from everyone, and it seems to be going good. So I'm gonna start taking all these appointments in as it goes. So I appreciate all the support from everyone.
Not even just my personal life, the tuning stuff went like through the roof after that. Like everyone ended up knowing who I was. They're like, oh, you're the guy that almost died in St. Croix. And all of a sudden it was like, everyone wanted me to do their car, which for the first like 6 or 7 months, it was tough. Like I didn't have the energy. Like it was hard for me to even get out of bed. I couldn't walk. Like if I was anywhere, I had crutches and I couldn't drive a car on the dyno. So I think one of the first cars that I did, I had a friend of mine come with me to the dyno, and I just sat in the passenger seat while he drove it. And, you know, I made the changes. But even just doing that, like I had a tough time breathing, and it wasn't fun. So it wasn't really something I wanted to do anymore. Like, I didn't want to work on cars. I didn't want to race them, obviously, because of what I had gone through. The car stuff had put such a negative impact on my life that I didn't want anything to do with it. As I started to feel better, I started realizing that this is all I do. You know what I mean? I've loved the car scene from, like I was saying, you know, a little kid, and then as I actually got into it firsthand, like it grabbed me and it was like nothing else I wanted to do. If I'm not into cars, I can't think of any other form of work that I would be content, you know, doing. So in 2021, it was, I would say October 2021, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. It was to the point where I had to get surgery like, you know, a couple weeks later. It was within 2 weeks that I had to get surgery. So I had to have my left testicle removed, and then I ended up getting a vasectomy on my right one because I already had, you know, 4 kids now. So I was like, while you're there, just cut the other one. So I felt I had something wrong. Like I could feel something down there that just didn't feel normal. Like it had like not a constant pain, but like say I was taking a shower, I would feel it and like it would bother me. This was, I want to say 2 years prior that I already knew that something was wrong. I went and saw my primary doctor, told him about it. He's like, oh, it's not a big deal. Guys get cysts all the time. I wouldn't worry about it. That was it. I was like, okay. Doctor said I'm fine. So he didn't run any tests, didn't do anything. He felt it and he's like, oh, it's normal. I wouldn't worry about it. So time went on. I ended up having my youngest son now prior to me finding out that I actually had cancer. So a few months later, a really good friend of mine ended up getting diagnosed with like stage 4 cancer, and he had it like in his lymph nodes in his neck, and it had spread really bad. After seeing what he went through, I was like, I don't want to be in a position in a few years where I find out I'm dying. So I went and saw a urologist. They did blood work and, you know, they did a sonogram and stuff. It was clear as day. Like the cancer markers came up, and in the pictures you could see it was like a, you know, solid mass. And he was like, you got to get surgery. You know, I'm gonna schedule you this week. And I was like, I freaked out. I was like, man, like I knew something was wrong 2 years ago, and it's just getting dealt with now. It happens for a reason. Like it ends up being a good thing. Like if I would have figured out that I had cancer back 2 years prior, I wouldn't have my youngest son now. So if I would have had the surgery back in, 2019 when it should have gotten done, my youngest son now would have never been born. So thankfully, we were able to catch it, was able to get rid of the cancer. And ever since then, I've had to get CT scans and blood work and go to visits it started off as like every 6 weeks, and then it turned into every couple months, and then now it's every 6 months. I have to go get a contrast CT scan where I have to drink this like disgusting liquid, and they do what they call a contrast CT scan. So it goes through, your whole body, and you slide in the machine, and then it can see anything in your body that's off. Luckily, this November will be 3 years that I'm cancer-free, thankfully. For me, it was definitely a shock, and at first, I didn't think of how serious it could have been, and then as I started having to go to the doctor more often, I was like, man, this could have been really bad. Something I could have died from just from neglect, whether it be on my part or the doctors not thinking it's a big deal. I could have died over, something that should have been taken care of, and me posting about it actually helped, certain people. I've had guys message me that ask me questions, and they're like, oh, I feel like something's wrong too. And I tell them, look, go to the doctor. It's not going to hurt. Go see your primary or go see your urologist. You'll know right away. And I had 2 separate guys just from hitting me up found out that they had cancer also, that they had no clue about. They got the idea because of I posted about it and what I was kind of going through and what I felt and what didn't seem normal to me. They were able to go through the same stuff, and when they found out they had cancer, obviously I don't wish that on anybody, but it's cool that I'm able to post about something like that and possibly save someone's life just by showing, what I've gone through on my own personal life. I had, before this, had a big, F cancer logo on it and stuff, and it brought a lot of attention to the cancer. And going to the track, and I had a lot of guys that would ask me stuff about it, and it's cool to spread that kind of information out there, because I feel like a lot of guys go through this and they don't realize it. It's not something that they realize. Guys figure, well, oh, I'm 30, I shouldn't be getting cancer. You can get it at, in your teens, early 20s. It's not gonna neglect anybody. Anyone can get it, so it's something that you should be on top of. Obviously, I changed the wrap on the car now, but it is gonna get some logos back to, representing the cancer stuff. That's why I kept it the purple to, represent the testicular cancer. It has been a big part of my life since then, since 2021. I wouldn't say that I've, have started groups or, stuff like that, but I have been in touch with a lot of people that go through the same stuff, or, I'm very open if anyone has any questions that you want to ask me, what to look out for and stuff. I've learned a lot on it, obviously, over the past few years, so I can give you any information you want, but I think a lot of guys should be more open to taking care of that stuff, because a lot of guys, it's kind of they feel like it's weird. They don't want to go see a doctor about, oh, hey, can you look at my nuts or something. It's kind of taboo. They'd rather just not deal with it. A lot of guys don't like going to the doctor, period. Nonetheless, I might possibly have to get my testicles cut out, but it is a big deal. People die from it, so if it's something that you can tackle early on, it'll definitely save you. Around this time, it was 2021, that I found out that I had the cancer. That was actually the first time that I brought this car out to FL2K 2021. I want to say I found out 2 weeks prior. My head was all over the place. I didn't really care about the racing. I went there, had some problems, but the car was in more of a street form there. I don't know if anyone has followed me and remembers the car. It used to be yellow. It almost looked like a Civic Type R. It's making a lot less power. It was a nice build, but it definitely wasn't to this level yet. When I found out that I had the cancer and I had to get surgery, I didn't want to deal with the car stuff anymore. I was more focused on my health and stuff, so I got rid of the car. I ended up having my surgery. Things were going good. My health was good. The guy that had the car, he didn't do anything with it. It was just a shell. It had all the all-wheel drive parts on it. And ironically, this car almost was the TRC all-wheel drive car. Javier had his interest in buying it because it was really nice. It had all CTR parts on it. It looked like a yellow Type R, but it was all-wheel drive. And luckily for them, they didn't buy it, and lucky for me, they didn't buy it because, I still have it now, and I think the RSX was a solid move on their part, but it's kind of cool how, I still ended up with the car. So the guy, he wasn't doing anything with it, and he offered the car back to me, and I was like, you know what? I'll buy it back. At the time, I still didn't really want to race. I had a nice four-door street car with 800 horsepower that I drove every day with AC, full exhaust and stuff. I didn't want something like this. As time went on and, the cancer stuff was staying away and I was talking with people more about it and stuff. It's like, I wanted to do something a little more over the edge with this car. Like, I knew I wasn't gonna die type of thing. It was like, I didn't think I was gonna die when I found out cancer, but as time went on, it was like, how different would my life have been if it was something that would have taken over me, you know what I mean? I couldn't do this type of stuff anymore. I couldn't tune cars anymore. I couldn't go racing. And I was like, since I have the opportunity, you know, the time, the money, the health to build something of this level, you know, something I've wanted to do my whole life, I was like, I'm gonna put all my effort into going all out on a track car, which I hadn't done in over a decade. Like my last race car was that orange coupe back in, you know, the mid 2000s or late 2000s, and fast forward, this is already 2021. I hadn't had a race car in a very long time. The last car that I even piloted, it was for TAE Used Auto Parts. We had a sport front car, but this was 2013. So that was the last car that I raced prior to this. It was definitely a big jump going from a 900 horsepower, 1,000 horsepower street car to going to something like this, but I don't regret it. It's something, this is my passion. I love doing this stuff. To build something from like bare scratch all on my own, you know, I loved it. You know, I did probably 80% of this stuff on my own in my own garage in my house. It's been an ongoing process. It started off at 900, I made 1,000. Funny enough, the motor that came in the car when I bought it, because the car was already like a half-built all-wheel drive car that Someone Local built that it just wasn't running yet, and I ended up finishing it off. Got it running, made 1,000, and it bent some valves, and I was like, oh, that's weird. I take it apart, and the pistons were backwards. Whoever built the motor in the car that it came with put the pistons in backwards, and that's kind of what started like the transition to do everything on the car different. So I did a new motor, I did a different turbo kit, and it progressed and progressed and progressed. And like the goal at first was just to have an 8-second car. If I went 890 on radials, I would be ecstatic. The car was fast in the street. I didn't get to really race anyone with it because things have changed a lot. Like I'm, you know, 41 years old now, have kids and stuff, so I'm not going out to the spot and stuff like I used to. So what seemed like such a super cool idea to have like 1,000, 1,200 horsepower street car, when I actually had it, I didn't enjoy it. So it's like, these things are a handful. To have a car like at that power level on the street, it's not safe, you know what I mean? Like I can do it, you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, but people don't realize how fast these cars really are. Like when you can go a 3.0 or something, 60 to 130 on the street, it's crazy. Like these things are really fast. So stopping is like a whole nother thing. That was kind of where the car transitioned into just having it a straight track car. Like I drove it a few times on the street at 1,000 horsepower and it just wasn't for me. It didn't, like, don't get me wrong, like it felt amazing, but in my head I was like, this car would be much better used trying to, you know, aim for a number at the track. So first time out ever with the car, it goes an 840. And I was like, and it was like not even a great pass, and I was shocked. I was like, holy cow, like I definitely wasn't expecting that. I thought like if it goes an 880, 890, I'll be good. It goes boom, 840. And it doing that was like kind of like a bad thing, because then it turned into like, well, if I do this, then it'll go a 7. So it was like, all right, new turbo kit now, and new fuel system, and all this stuff. And then next outing, it goes an 8.1.
They unleash the hounds, and Alfredo out early. Alfredo coming off the starting line with authority, 123 to the 60-foot, 815, 167.
That 8.1 to a 7.999 was such a fight. People don't think or realize what it takes to get like a 10th or 2/10 at that level. It took probably, I want to say, 6 months to go from a 8.1 to a 7-second pass. And it took a lot of testing and tuning and stuff, but I ended up putting a sequential in the car, and it wasn't to go any faster, just I kept having issues with the tranny braking. Like it would round off the dogs or break shift forks or just random stuff in the car. Put the sequential in, first pass, 770, 192 miles an hour. Literally the first hit on the sequential, it goes to 770, 192 miles an hour. And this was January, February of 2023. This transmission in the car now is the same exact transmission that I put in the car that weekend. Same gear set, same everything. I have not taken this transmission apart since February of 2023. And the car's gone 7s a ton of times since then. Like, and it was like before, like once you get that first 7 or something, it happens like, now it's like every pass a car goes 7s, whether it blows up, I let off somewhere, it goes 7s like clockwork.
So how many cars do you think you've tuned over the years?
I would say, figure from 04, 05 to 2024, doing 400 to 500 cars a year, it's up there, and it's well into the thousands. It's cool seeing, how many different setups in that timeline from the 04, 05 to now, and doing that many cars a year. It's like I've seen everything. Obviously, there's certain builds that stand out, but to do that many cars in that period of time, it's like crazy to look back and think that that's even possible. It's nuts when you think about it. Like if I pull up the screen here, or any of the other dynos that I've used locally, and it's just tens of thousands of run files from everything. You could think of 1600 horsepower K-Series to 100 horsepower single cams. I've done everything you could think of, and it's like I'm known for the Honda stuff, but I've done a lot more. I've done some Toyota stuff and whatnot, but a lot of my experience obviously is from just doing so many different cars. It is a lot of work. Like it's definitely crazy to be on the dyno all hours of the night, but it's cool at the same time to be able to do something like this for such a long period of time and still be able to do it. Looking back over the past, I don't know, say, 20 plus years that I've been involved with cars and stuff, it's definitely humbling to see, what I've accomplished, mostly on my own with the race car and just how in depth I got with the tuning stuff and doing a lot of it on my own, not really going to school for it and stuff, and having such a long career in something that I love doing, it's definitely, a great feeling, and looking at that it can continue, in the future, I'm not sure how long I'm not gonna tune the rest of my life, but knowing that I have a solid gig going on, doing something I love, and being able to look at, this car, looking at when Hondas were first running 11s and stuff and thinking that was amazing. I never in my life would have pictured a Honda could make 1600 horsepower or run a 7-second pass, and to actually own one or actually build one myself in my garage. It's crazy to think like, yeah, in my head when I was younger, I thought, yeah, I can do that just as like a dream, but to actually have it as a reality and have something that I can continue to do it's pretty awesome to think about it. Like, not everyone gets to have stuff like this or, have the means to build a car at this level and nonetheless, do it themselves. It's a great feeling. Like I kind of overlook it a lot of times because it's become so normal. Like I go in the garage every day and a lot of times you don't even look at it. It's like, oh yeah, but it's like when you actually sit back and look at what you've accomplished by yourself, it's pretty awesome. Like when you look at the top 10 list with the Honda stuff or just any car, really, there's not a lot of guys that still do their own stuff. I would say in the top 10 list, maybe Speed Factory, you can argue, they do everything on their own, but at the same time, they're kind of a shop. I don't think there's anyone else on that list that, builds their own motors, tunes their own car, does all their own track prep stuff, drives it, and pretty much does everything on their own. It's not normal anymore. Like you used to see it a lot more where guys would do a lot of their own stuff, and now it's kind of been where you get guys that drive for other people or they have, this guy tune it or whatnot. But for me, it's always been, since it's been a passion for me, it's like I want to do everything myself. Like I don't like getting other people involved to get into this stuff. And it's kind of one of those things where I take a lot of pride in the stuff I do, and I like to show it on my car, and whether it be different setups and stuff that guys normally won't do and whatnot, it's like I take pride in doing stuff out of the normal that you're not gonna see on your average stuff. Like same with the work. Like I take a lot of pride in the tuning stuff, and even though I've been doing it forever, it's like I come in and I'm happy to be here. You know what I mean? I'm not annoyed to have to come to work. It's not something that is an aggravation. It's like, I still love doing this even after 20 plus years. And it's like I mentioned before, it's not every time that you get to do what you love as a living. So it's like, I kind of embrace it, you know what I mean? Every day, whether it comes to the racing or the work. Another thing, seeing how much my kids love it is another thing. Like, it would have been nuts growing up. Like, I got involved in cars just from stories my dad told me about a car that he had when I wasn't even alive. And my kids get to see this every day. My little one, guys have probably seen videos online, but my little one, anytime this car runs or something, he's like ecstatic. Like he's only 2.5, turning 3, but he's like diehard into the car stuff. He's got a million little cars at home. Every day he has to get a little truck and trailer. He has a little Civic that looks like mine. He puts it on the trailer, and it's awesome to see how involved he is into cars. And I'm not gonna force it onto him, but if he can kind of carry on what I do with the racing stuff, it would be awesome. Like, unfortunately, my oldest son, he didn't get into cars. Like, I would have let him drive this whenever he wanted to. And he just never got into it. It's not for everybody, you know what I mean? But I would love to just go to the track and have my kid driving my race car, or he can get into doing it and he can build his own race car. You know, I have the means to get any of my kids involved. I'll get them a race car that, you know, as soon as they want to, but it's not something I'm gonna force on them, you know what I mean? It's, if you're into racing and you have a kid and you're not getting them into this stuff, then you're missing out, you know what I mean? It's like the scene is missing out also, because it's like you have the means to carry on this legacy or, you know, just knowledge of cars into the next generation. I feel a lot of people skip out on that, you know, not teaching what they know to other people.